Welcome, boys and girls. Here in lesson 2.1, the essential question is how can you place the first digit in a quotient using place value? Now, we're going to go through our steps in a long division problem, but before we go through that, we need to understand what it looks like using our base 10 blocks here. And we're going to take a look at a few examples using our base 10 blocks. Take a look at our first example here. We have 235 divided by 5. Alright, so what I did was, since we are taking this 235 and dividing by 5, I'm creating 5 groups here. Now, what I need to do is I need to represent the number 235 with our base 10 blocks. And I start with my largest place, the hundreds place. I have 2 hundreds, so I'm going to take 2 hundreds blocks to represent the 2 hundreds. I'm going to take my 3 tens, because I have 3 in the tens place. And I'm going to take my 5 ones, because I have a 5 in the ones place. Now, what I need to do is I need to take each of these blocks and I need to divide them up equally into these 5 groups. And whenever we do that, what we do is we start with our largest place. We start with our hundreds blocks. We have 2 of these hundreds blocks here. Now, we need to ask ourselves, can we take these 2 hundreds blocks and evenly distribute them into the 5 groups? And the answer is we can't. If we were able to take the hundreds blocks and put them into the groups, only 2 of these groups would have a hundreds block. So now, since we can't take these 2 hundreds blocks and evenly distribute them into the 5 groups, what we need to do is we need to regroup the hundreds. We need to take each one of these hundreds and we need to replace them with 10 tens. So I'm going to take this hundreds away and I'm going to replace that with 10 tens to replace the 100. And then I'm going to take this hundreds block away and I'm also going to replace that with 10 tens. So now what I did, I took my 2 hundreds blocks and I replaced them with 10 tens. So here are my 10 tens that I had for my first 100, and here are my 10 tens that I took for my second 100 after I regrouped. So what I'm left here with are 20 tens blocks, but I also have my 3 ones blocks here. So what I basically have is I have 23 tens that I'm left with. And what I need to do is I need to take these 23 tens and I need to divide them equally into 5 groups. If I took 23 tens and I divide them equally into these 5 groups, I would be left with 4 in each of these groups. So now you can see from the 23 tens that I had, I was able to take those 23 tens and I was able to put 4 in each group. But what I'm left with here is I'm left with 3 tens that are left over. I can't place these 3 tens that I have left over and put them into the 5 equal groups. So what I need to do with each of these 3 tens is I need to regroup these 3 tens. I need to take my 3 tens away and I need to replace each one of these tens with 10 ones. So if I have 3 tens that I'm replacing with 10 ones, I would be replacing them with 30 ones. So what we did was we placed those 10 tens, those 10 tens, those 3 tens I should say, with 30 ones. So what I'm left here is I'm left with 30 ones here, and then the 5 ones that I originally started with. So what I have together is now I have a combined 35 ones that I need to divide into 5 equal groups. So if I take my 35 ones, and I take those 35 ones and I'm dividing them into 5 groups, I would know from my basic facts that 35 divided by that 5 would give me 7. That would mean that there would be 7 ones that would fit into each one of these groups. So if I take those ones that I had those 35 ones that I had left over, and put them into 5 equal groups. I have 7 in each group. And now what I could see that I have in each group, each of these 5 groups, I would have 4 tens in each group. That would give me a 4 in the tens place, and I have 7 ones in each group, which would give me a 7 in the ones place. Therefore, the answer to 235 divided by 5 would be an answer of 47. I have nothing remaining. That's how you would model a division problem using these base 10 blocks. So now let's take a look at this example. We have 453 that we need to divide up into 3 groups. So I made my 3 circles along the side. And now what I need to do is I need to represent that 453 by using my hundreds block. So I'm going to have 4 hundreds to represent the 400. And then I'm going to have 5 tens to represent the 5 tens in 453. And then I'm also going to take my 3 ones, because there's 3 ones in the ones place. So I have my 5 tens, I have my 4 hundreds, and now I'm going to have my 3 ones. Now what I need to do is I need to take each of these and I need to see if I could evenly distribute them into my 3 groups. And I start with my largest place. I start with my hundreds. I need to see if I have enough hundreds to put them into equal groups of 3. So if I had my 3 groups, I take 100, put it in one group, another hundreds block, put it in another group, and another hundreds block, and put it in that group. I have enough so I can have 1 in each group. But I do have 1 hundreds block left over. I can't take this hundreds block and put it into our 3 groups here, because one group would have 2, and the other groups would have 1 hundreds block. So what I need to do with this hundreds block is I need to regroup it. I need to take this hundreds block away, and I'm going to replace it with 10 tens blocks. So as you can see, I took my hundreds block and I replaced it with 10 tens. So now I have 10 tens blocks here, but I also have my 5 other tens blocks that I have right here, which leaves me with 15 tens blocks. I need to take these 15 tens blocks and I need to evenly distribute them into each of 3 groups. So if I had my 15 tens blocks and I need to divide them equally into 3 groups, the operation is 15 divided by 3. Now I could take each one of these blocks and move them in one by one, but if I know my basic facts, 15 divided by 3 is 5, then that tells me that there's going to have to be 5 tens blocks in each one of these groups. So as you can see, each group now has those 5 tens blocks after I distributed them equally into those 3 groups. But I'm not finished, because what I'm left here with is our 3 ones. Here are our 3 ones blocks. I need to take these 3 ones blocks and I need to evenly distribute them into the 3 groups. If I took these 3 ones blocks and I had to divide them into 3 groups, the operation is 3 divided by 3. And I know that 3 divided by 3 is going to equal 1. Therefore, if I had 453 and I divided it equally into 3 groups, I'm going to have 1 hundreds in each group, I'm going to have 5 tens in each group, and I'm also going to have 1 1 in each group. Therefore, my answer would be, to 453 divided by 3, the quotient would be 151. This is how we use base 10 blocks to solve a long division problem. Now, we're not always going to have base 10 blocks to help us solve a long division equation, but what I do want you to do is I want you to think in terms of those base 10 blocks as we go ahead and we try to solve this problem here. Now, I have the problem 274 divided by 4. Now, keep in mind that this 274 divided by 4, we first look at these 200s. And I want you to think of these 200s blocks, and I want you to think of the 4 groups, the 4 circles that we made for the previous examples. And you need to ask yourself, can we take 200s blocks and evenly distribute them into 4 groups? The answer is no. I only have 200s blocks. I can't evenly distribute them into 4 groups. So what we need to do is we need to hold that place because we don't have enough hundreds to put them into 4 groups. And what we need to do is we need to regroup. What we would do if we were using a base 10 blocks is we'd take these 200s and we would replace each one of these hundreds with 10 tens. And what we would do is we would take 2 of those 10 tens, which would give you 20, combine them with the 7 tens that we would have had from the tens block, and we regroup them, and now what we're left with is we're left with 27 tens. What we need to do is we need to take those 27 tens and we need to put them equally into groups of 4. If we took 27 tens and divided them into 4 groups, what we would be left, what would we have is we would have 6 in each group. What we did just there is we divided. We took that 27 and we divided it by 4 and we got 6. Because what that means, in each of these 4 groups that we had here along the side, there would be 6 tens in each of those 4 groups. So if there was 6 tens in each of 4 groups, that means we would have used 24 tens. What that step right there is, after you divide, is you're multiplying. After you multiply, what you need to do is you need to figure out how many tens would be left over. If I had 4 groups and I had 20 and I had 6 tens in each one of those 4 groups, I would have used 24 of those tens, but I had 27 to start with. That means I'd be left with 3 tens that were left over. At this point, if I had 3 tens left over, I need to ask myself, would I be able to put those 3 tens into 4 groups? The answer is no. So the next part that I need to do after I subtracted, I need to bring down my 4. And if we were using base 10 blocks, we would take these 3 tens and we would replace those 3 tens. We would regroup those 3 tens with 31s. But we also would have had the 4 ones from the 274, combine them, and now what you're left with here is you're left with 34 ones. And what you would have to do is you'd have to take 34 of these ones and divide them into 4 groups. So we divided to start out, we multiplied, we subtracted, we checked to see if we could make another group, and we couldn't, so we had to bring down. And what's happening when we bring down is we're regrouping. We took these 3 tens and these 4 ones and we created 34 ones. We need to take this 34 ones and we need to divide those 34 ones into 4 groups. 34 divided by 4 would get me 8 ones that would be in each of the 4 groups. If I had 8 ones in each of the 4 groups, that would get me 32 ones that I used. 34 minus that 32 would get me 2 ones that were left over. If I have nothing left to bring down at this point after I've subtracted, the 2 is the remainder that I'm left with. Therefore, the quotient to 274 divided by 4 would be 68 with a remainder of 2. Now let me just show you what this would have looked like if we were using our base 10 blocks. Here are our 4 groups, and here's our 274 that we're using with our base 10 blocks to represent. Here's the 200s, here are the 7 tens, and here are the 4 ones along the bottom. Now what we did when we started out was we took these 200s and we asked ourselves if we could divide them into 4 groups. Right? We put an X over this too because we knew that we couldn't take these 200s and divide them into 4 groups. So what we needed to do was we needed to regroup these 200s and take 10 tens from this 100 and 10 tens from this 100. And what we would be left with is we'd be left with 20 tens. So I take that away and I regroup and I have my 20 tens from there. But I also had 7 tens from the 274. So what I did was I combined them. I'm left with 27 tens here total. What we did was we took these 27 tens that we're left with and we divided them equally into each of these 4 groups. And we took this 27 and we divided it by 4, and that we knew that there would have to be 6 of these tens blocks in each group. So we took those 27 tens and we divided into 4 groups, and what we did was we realized there would have to be 6 in each group, but if we had 6 in each of these 4 groups, what we were left with is we used 24 of those tens, and what we had left over was our 3 left over. That's where we have our 3. And what we saw was we couldn't take these 3 tens and divide them into those 4 groups. So what do we need to do? We need to regroup these tens. So we replace each of those tens blocks, those 3 tens blocks, we replace them with 10 ones. So what we were left with was the 30 ones plus the 4 ones that we originally had from 274, and that's where we came up with our 34. We regrouped. Bringing down is just like regrouping. We regrouped it and we got our 34. And we had to decide if we have 34 of these ones and we need to divide them into 4 groups. What we said was we would take that 34 divided by 4, and that would leave us with 8 in each group. 8 ones would be in each group. So if we took those and if we put 8 of those ones in each of those 4 groups, we would have used 32 of those ones, and then what we're left with here is these 2 ones that are left over. So then in each one of these 4 groups you'd have 6 tens, which you see here, and you have 8 ones, which you see here, and then there are 2 that are left over that don't have any group to join, so that forms your remainder. Therefore the quotient to 274 divided by 4 would be 68, remainder 2. And this is how you use place value to determine where you're placing this first number. Like I said in class today, you need to understand the steps to solving a division problem with the D, the M, the multiply, the S subtract, the C check, and the B bring down. But it's also important that you understand what it looks like when you're actually dividing these. So as you go through these division problems, I want you to keep in mind, I want you to visualize what's actually happening with each one of these places as you divide. You might not always have these base 10 blocks here when you go through a long division operation, but think in terms of those base 10 blocks as you're dividing, which will certainly help.